Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin. We the species. I'm talking fast. We have a lot of stuff to do. I'm with Christine Hanlon, Monmouth County Clerk, and I'm with Adam Worth, five-time Emmy Award-winning uh, filmmaker. I'm deeply honored to be here, to be doing this in conjunction with the 250th. A lot of public people kind of forget this 250th um, anniversary of America and in Monmouth County. We're going to talk about that because I never even realized how important Monmouth County was during the Revolutionary War. My goodness, until I saw a documentary a little bit ago, and I'm fairly educated. Wow, and that's from 250th. So they put together this amazing. You guys are a team. This is your third collaboration. You're a team. Monmouth County at War, Rebels, Raiders, and Revolution, and it's screening at the upcoming Garden State Film Festival, a premier national independent film festival that I've been involved with for 10 years. Love Diane, love Lauren. It's a marvelous, marvelous film festival, global but indie, and it's wonderful. So my monologue is done. I used to call it a Johnny Carson monologue. It's done. Let's talk a little bit. How about a minute or two, Christine and Adam, just a little background stuff, and then we'll jump in.
Sure.
Take it away,
Uh, I,
Christine.
I think I'll get started. This collaboration came out of our Monmouth County government planning for America's 250th birthday celebrations here in the county. And, I had worked with Adam before on a few different projects. And we thought, what a great way to preserve our history, to educate our community about how important Monmouth was in the fight for independence. So we decided to do this documentary, and it's been an honor to work with Adam and watch him do his craft. He's so talented, and it came out great. And this is a really big part of our commemoration of America, our great country's birthday.
Great.
Yeah. I'll just add to that. Christine nailed it. I mean, as we mentioned, the Monmouth County Clerk, and Christina, I think will agree that it's the part of the clerk's responsibilities to be sort of the record keeper of the county. So, like, for her to be involved in documentary, I think is just super cool. It's a sort of way to tell these stories and to keep these records in a new sort of modern way. I don't know any other organization, government, or place that is sort of that is doing that. He's telling these stories. This is our third movie together. We've done one on 9/11, we've done one on Hurricane Sandy, and now we've done one on the Revolutionary War and its impact in Monmouth County. So to be preserving these stories is the clerk's duty, but in this modern way, you have to hand it to Christine in her office to be preserving them in this cool modern way of documentary filmmaking, which can lend itself to really getting those stories out there, getting them to the youth, getting them to school children, getting them out there. We're here now. I think is just super cool. So I'm lucky that she came to me and asked me to be involved with this film. And the Monmouth NJ 250 committee is, by the same token, has been, in charge of all of the events and celebrations related to the 250th anniversary of America and of Monmouth County. And so this film was produced, by Christine's office, by the Monmouth NJ 250 committee, to sort of tell the history and tell, because we believe, and we always talk about how Monmouth County sort of holds its own as far as you look at places like Philadelphia, Boston. We also have a Revolutionary War legacy that I think is a story really worth telling that maybe enough people don't know about. And that's kind of what we wanted to tell with this film. And that's why we're eager for people in Monmouth County and beyond to see it.
Correct. I saw a national documentary a month or so ago, and Ken Burns, American Revolution, before I knew about what you guys were doing. And I said to myself, my goodness, everything is going through Monmouth County. You can
Yep.
see, I never knew that. That's a county. Okay, to
Yeah.
work. Adam, when Monmouth County approached you to create the film, what immediately struck you as to the story that had to be told?
Well, some of the things that I learned making the film that I think were among the most interesting. I mean, there's a ton of just people and heroes and drama. I mean, and there were literally pirates and raiders off of the coast of the Jersey Shore. I'm from Wanamassa here in Monmouth County. I live in Neptune, so just to imagine people rowing out to humongous British ships in the middle of the night and sort of climbing on board, knives in their mouth, climbing up the ropes and just kind of raiding these huge British vessels. I mean, just to think of that as piracy right here, just where we could see it from where we all sit on the beach in the summertime. Those kind of stories, and I mean, I love the fact that I always talk about how Sandy Hook was a British held territory throughout the war. In fact, it was the longest held territory that the British held from the beginning of the war till well after. Is the last place they left. So to imagine Sandy Hook, where we all sort of ride our bikes and walk our dogs, to be enemy territory during this war and to just be full of soldiers from across the ocean, living there, and local residents, loyalists, people who sided with the British from Monmouth County. Their homes were taken from them. They were forced out of their communities. They were going toe to toe with their neighbors. So a lot of them ended up on Sandy Hook because there was no safe place for someone who was siding with the British to sort of hide from the rebels. So people going there and living there. What was at the time an island, it's now a peninsula, but at the time Sandy Hook was an island, which I also was surprised to learn about while making this movie. So kind of a desolate island, not a lot of food. They would be leading raids and leading parties back into Monmouth County to steal food, steal livestock, steal goods from the people who from the places they knew and were familiar with. So they would come back into their own neighborhoods, come back into the towns that they knew how to navigate and steal and raid from them. So it's really just neighbor coming back in, fighting neighbor against neighbor, just an incredible, few years that Monmouth County and had experienced. And I don't think not a lot of places in America really ever went through that sort of adventure, that sort of turmoil.
Correct. Christine, from your perspective as county clerk and keeper of history, why was this the right moment to tell this story?
Well, I think that obviously because it was America's 250th birthday, this was the perfect time to tell the story. As Adam said, there was so much history that took place here. And as keeper of the records in Monmouth, I'm I think the only county clerk in the state that oversees an archive. And I have records that go back to the 1600s, fascinating things. I have a lot of Revolutionary War records. I also have research assistants in my archives division. And when I started this project 3 years ago, along with Commissioner Director Tom Arnone, and started thinking about what are we going to do to preserve our history, tell the story, celebrate America's birthday. We came up with all of these different things, whether it's, the parade, the gala, the 5K that we're doing, but telling the history part of it is very, very important for our children, for future generations. And one of the first things I did was to ask my research team in archives to come up with sort of a little framework of what was going on here. Look at our documents. What did you find? So they started creating this little narrative for us. But then as part of the whole commemoration, because we wanted to be historically accurate, we brought on historical advisors from across the county and across the state. And these are the experts in what happened in New Jersey during the Revolutionary War, and very specifically what happened in Monmouth County. So we brought those people in on top of what I had from archives to really create this very, very important historical documentary, because so many people maybe they hear the Battle of Monmouth and they don't necessarily know what that was, what happened. But there was so much more. So telling the story of the Battle of Monmouth, but telling what happened before that, what happened after that, and what was going on in everyday life here in Monmouth County, this was just the perfect time to do it and tie it into the semi-quincentennial.
I couldn't say that word. I avoided that word.
Yeah, I've gotten good at it.
I
So
don't know if
many
you
times
noticed.
I've had to say it.
I try to stay away from that word. Okay, yeah. This aspect I didn't understand. I didn't realize either. The film shows neighbor versus neighbor, in conflict. Why is that aspect of the revolution so important for people to understand today? Because I never even realized that your neighbor, it could have been like a Tory kind
It
of
could have
thing.
been your brother
Yeah.
or sister.
Yeah. No, well, I think, I mean, I guess what we kind of meant by that was what was some of the historians that we interviewed, sort of explained that the war, this was kind of, like the first civil war in a way that our country saw, because the British came here and, a lot of people sided with the British. And if you think about it, this massive, invading army, we didn't have really an army here. So really, to side with the British was the more sort of sensible, pragmatic sort of thing for a lot of people to do. So it didn't really make, it took a lot more courage to side with the rebels. So lots of people played it safe, sided with the British. They had this huge empire, and it was really just a daunting undertaking to think that you could take them on. So, to that end, a lot of people were, believed in the cause of starting our own government, starting an independent nation. A lot of people didn't, or they didn't think we would win. So really, you could be out your farm, your neighbor has their farm next door. One day you're chatting about the weather, and then things could turn to politics, and then
You're getting
there's a
shot.
war, right? There's a war erupting around you, and that's exactly what happened. Like people knew each other, people fought against each other who knew each other. Not only elected officials taking either side, and local government taking the other side, but just common people and everyday people and farmers. And there was a lot of people who ran away, because they wanted to go and fight with the British. So people left Monmouth County, and the people who, it's very interesting that the people who fought with the British throughout the war, a lot of them kind of weren't welcome after the war back in Monmouth County. A lot of them ended up going to Canada. And
Wow.
one of the historians that we interviewed talks about how it's sort of odd that in Monmouth County, these people were exiles and they were sort of, much maligned figures, but they went off to Canada and became sort of founding fathers of up in Canada and, up in North, where they didn't really have as much community established yet. So really, I guess that's what we mean by neighbor against neighbor. It's
Yeah.
very much
Yeah.
literal.
Yeah.
I just wanted
Um,
to add one thing to that,
yes.
if I could. And I think that's such an important concept, because in school, we kind of learn like the top lines. And, you have this impression that, all the people were rising up against the British government. But when you dig down into that, you know, it's really neighbors, family members taking different sides of the conflict. And also, the historians say, that there were more people in Monmouth County fighting for the British cause than in any other county in New Jersey. So, those are the things that you don't learn in school, or when you're thinking about, how we gained our independence. So really the concept of, it was such like a civil war, like internal strife here. And also it was a very dangerous place, because your neighbor could be coming after you
Yeah.
because they might be on the other side of the
Yeah.
conflict. So that is all kind of weaved into the documentary.
Really dangerous if you really think about it,
Very,
your
yes.
own neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Adam, what was some of the surprising or lesser known things you uncovered as you're putting this together?
Sure. Well, I mean, to the same point about neighbor against neighbor, I thought it was interesting that, as the war was breaking out, a lot of the wealthier people left the area. So if that sort of happened now and this county became a war zone and a dangerous place to live, the people who could afford to leave would probably leave. A lot of them would. So at the time, we lost a lot of doctors and lawyers and wealthy, people with, highfalutin jobs or whatever, would often sort of just hightail it right out of the county to preserve their life and their family's life. So it's interesting to think of, how Monmouth County might have been different, and, what sort of different paths it would have taken if we didn't lose all of these, white collar jobs and white collar people, 250 years ago when everybody left, which is, I think, one kind of interesting thing. So it was a lot of people fighting were the people who couldn't afford to really do anything else and who really just had to stay here.
Really interesting. This is such an eye opener for me. And again, that was my favorite subject in school, history. And I'm really so fascinated by all this. Christine, you work obviously among the five different things about a clerk. I read that too. I never knew that as well. You work closely with historical records. Did anything that you've uncovered in all this stuff you're doing personally change how you view the American Revolution?
Yes, I think it goes back to some of the things that I talked about already, and like the conflicts and the danger here. One of the things we have was like an original spy map of soldiers who were spying on, I think it was the British spying on the Continental Army. We have these amazing Inquisition and confiscation records where there was like sort of a court process where you were questioned if you were deemed to be siding with the British, and from that all of your property could be taken. So the documents that I found, they enlightened me as to this really difficult conflict about what was going on and people's property being taken and kind of the both sides of the struggle. We have documents and archives that have sort of like the British Crown seal on them. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, these documents date back before the Revolutionary War, where we were subjects of the crown. And it was just, it's just so fascinating to look back at these items that we have. And they really tied into the narrative and the story and the things that we learned about the Revolutionary War in Monmouth County.
Priceless. Priceless. Wow. Adam, with your experience in documentaries and broadcasting, did you do anything stylistically different to make history, because this is what this is, history feel more immediate and actually more cinematic? I watched a trailer, a great trailer, I it's like sometimes I want to go back in time and just be there and feel it. So I kind of felt it, watching the
Yeah.
trailer.
Well,
Adam
no,
really felt it.
yeah, right. Well, that's the challenge with this kind of filmmaking, telling a story from 250 years ago, is there isn't any B-roll and you can't go to the news archives and pull all this footage. So certainly one of the challenges that we thought a lot about initially was, where is this footage going to come from that we're going to show as B-roll while we're telling these stories? And obviously, there are a lot of amazing paintings and drawings and maps and things from Christine's archive that are relevant. And, I was surprised at how many paintings there are of Monmouth County and of people who lived here, because it was such a relevant place. But really, even more exciting than that is the history that is all around us, and that is still being reinterpreted by living history reinterpreters, reenactors in Monmouth County. So at the Battle of Monmouth, we shot for the last 3 years at the Battle of Monmouth. I was side by side with Ken Burns' crew, who was also filming their movie. And so we were, able to capture, thanks to all these incredible reenactors and just the level of detail with their costumes, reenacting the Battle of Monmouth. We also shot at the Washington's Crossing, when they reenact Washington's Crossing across the Delaware. And, so we have dozens or hundreds of people in full costume who are thrilled and, eager to sort of be a part of this documentary. And I sort of went a step further and embedded myself with this, what Christine's talking about. I became a reenactor myself. I went in full costume. I was trained on how to march by my new friend Bill from the NJ 2nd Regiment of Historical Reinterpreters. And so I was able to get up, next to everyone during the Battle of Monmouth with a discreet little camera, filming up close, pops of smokes and the cannons going off, and right in the line, as we're sort of marching. So I was kind of I had to dress up in full costume and bed myself with the reenactors to get the kind of close-up shots that we got for the movie. And I think that's what keeps it from being, you know, the opposite of kind of a boring, stuffy sort of history movie. You know, we got great footage of reenactors, muskets firing. There's a lot of action, you know. So we're super proud of the way all that came out.
Yeah. Another thing, of course, I didn't know, but the film highlights African American. I mean, who, you don't think of that. Native American, because, there's so many Native American elements here, and loyalist perspectives. Um, so you had to take all of these and you had to kind of broaden
Yeah.
the traditional narrative, and that's important what you did with this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of people think of this subject matter and they think of it as you know the story of George Washington on his horse, winning the entire Revolutionary War single-handedly. And we wanted to make sure that we told the stories of all the people from Monmouth County who fought, who had a hand in this, whether they were fighting on the side of the Continental Army or they were fighting on the side of the British. And so Monmouth County has stories like this. Monmouth County, as far as Molly Pitcher, as far as women who were deeply involved in a lot of the fighting, even include the most famous story being the story of Molly Pitcher, who we talk about in the movie. And we did also interview Claire Garland, who is a Native American with roots going back hundreds of years here in Monmouth County, and she's also the head of the Sand Hill Indian Association. The Sand Hill Indians being in the Neptune area, very much also going back hundreds of years, one of the original Native American tribes from the area. And so it was important to us to sort of tell those stories, what contributions everyone made to the war. And as far as African Americans, my personal favorite story was of an enslaved individual, Colonel Ty, who basically ran away from enslavement in Rumson to fight on the British side. So he ended up leading an entire a brigade of British loyalist soldiers from Sandy Hook back into Monmouth County, raiding farms, raiding, for supplies, for money. And he was a leader who ended up fighting, the Continental Army. And so his story is just, amazing. And we made sure to tell his story from beginning to end as best as we could in the film. So that's definitely a big part of it.
What what moment in the film do you think is going to hit audiences emotionally the hardest? Is there a point?
Um, I mean, I think, it's not, our film doesn't entirely take place in the past. We talk about our historical locations that are still here in Monmouth County. And I think Monmouth County, and Christine is an expert on this, but Monmouth County is lucky in that, in the 1950s and the 1970s, we had people with enough foresight to sort of preserve these historical homes, and Monmouth Battlefield being one of them. We talk a lot about the places that are still standing, that were standing during this time period in the Revolutionary War. So I think that the modern effort to sort of preserve and to sort of upkeep and to tell the stories to the next generations about the historical locations and sort of all the value and the knowledge and the storytelling that these places offer to everyone is something that we talk about in the film. And I think it sort of brings it into the modern era and is kind of an important aspect for everyone who lives here.
Christine, what do you hope like trickles down to residents of Monmouth County? What are they going to feel when they watch this? Pride stuff?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think people are going to be very inspired, obviously educated as to what really went on here during the revolution. I think they feel proud that they live in this community, and that there were people in this community who took steps to preserve our history and the sites that we have. One of the things that a lot of people might not realize is that it was in the 1970s that Monmouth Battlefield was preserved, and that
Wow.
came out of the bicentennial, and these are inspirational things for people, that they can learn from today and say, hey, I want to take part in that. This is important to me. That was one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to have this sort of coming forward to today, to be inspired by what happened in the past, be inspired by our history, but to take it forward, not just to leave it back there. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how we wanted people to feel with this.
An unbelievable undertaking. I just can't, I don't even process. I know what it is to write a book and the 5 years to write a book, but I mean, given, moving on, I control myself. There's talk about putting this into school curricula. This film into school curricula, and comparing this, to textbooks. This is
Yes.
visual stuff. So is that something you're thinking about?
Well, I'll speak to that a little bit, because we have done that with our prior projects that we've worked on. So, Adam and I got together and did the documentary about 9/11 and the impact in Monmouth County. And that is something every single year, the beginning of the school year, that I send to all of the schools in Monmouth County. I send the link and we ask them to work it into their curriculum. And also I show it to every group of interns that I have come through this office. And they're so taken aback by it. And they are like, I'm going back to tell my school that we need to show this. So that is like an effort that I've undertaken. And I'm going to do that with this documentary as well. And we'll work to get it out to the schools. I have to say with the schools, like you have to do it very consistently to get it to them. And it is an hour long, so working it into the curriculum. But it will be alive, like on our website, on YouTube. We'll be pushing it out everywhere. But getting it into the schools is very important, and we intend to undertake that.
Okay. Okay. Um, People don't fully understand the functions, of a county clerk, but how does preserving history fit into that umbrella of things you do? Um,
Well, going back to Revolutionary War times, really, the clerk was the keeper of very important records, and the clerk was the oath administer, because clerks could typically write. People who were clerks could handle these things, their education. Um, so our records, and it related mostly to property. So it was, and court records. So this was a function of the county clerk dating back hundreds of years. But our commissioners in Monmouth County years ago decided to put the county archives under the jurisdiction of the county clerk. It's not like that in every county, because it kind of tied into some of the things that the clerk was already doing with these property and court records. So then I became even more the keeper of, historical records. So it expanded there. And it's just one of my functions now. We have the county archives in Manalapan, and we have millions of historical records there. We have a team of, depending upon the time of year, 12 to 13 people who, this is their function, whether it's maintaining the records, preserving the records, conservation. Sometimes we have to destroy records that don't have historical value. We digitize. And so this has just become one of my functions over the years.
okay. Okay. By the way, I saw to it that when my son got married and a couple of kids were coming and stuff, I said, you have to live in Monmouth County. And I said, you got to
It's a
live in
place to
Monmouth
be.
County.
It's a
And
place you want
guess
to be.
what? You moved a mile away from me with my two grandkids. They're in
Nice.
Manalapan, I'm here. And that's my allegiance to Monmouth County. And they love it. So, all right, moving on. Adam, with five Emmys and 20 nominations under your belt, what still excites you from making documentaries?
I mean, I guess, that's a great question. I mean, I guess just, becoming so sort of entrenched in a single topic. I mean, like, I never, and just the surprise that comes along with that. So if you had asked me a few years ago, do you think you would know the minutia of the American Revolution in Monmouth County? I would have definitely said, why on earth would I know that? But, here I am, speaking about the Revolution in Monmouth County, and in all, I did find it, truly interesting. And I mean, I guess I'm just lucky that I was sort of born a history buff, and like I do really appreciate that. And as far as podcasts and things that I like enjoy in my spare time are often, books or often historical biographies. I've been learning all about the the rise and fall of the Mayans and the Incan civilizations lately has really been like interesting to me. So I guess just like thinking that something maybe a topic doesn't have much to offer me initially, to do a 180, to be like, I am sincerely interested and excited about this, and talk to so many people about it now all the time. After having learned, my, the interest sort of kind of grows along with it, and I hope that is kind of reflected in the end product of the film.
Okay, okay. So this completes a trilogy of three films you've done together. You mentioned what they were. What makes this creative partnership so successful? Because it's a great creative partnership.
Thank you. Well, I first want to give Adam props here because he is just so incredibly talented. And, I've talked before about how, sometimes a documentary can be a little bit dry. It's, sometimes they're hard to get through, but the way Adam does his craft, it really is so powerfully woven together that you just keep wanting to watch and absorb it all. So it's been a pleasure working with Adam. I know I drive him crazy sometimes, but we seem to get along really well, and we seem to have similar vision, and I just love his work. So it's I feel like it's been a really nice partnership, and I'm always proud of what Adam puts together, and I love that he does listen to me. Some of my little
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
tweaks and things like that, and I feel like it ends up being a great product, and it's a pleasure and an honor
Mm,
to work with Adam because he is so talented.
nice.
I mean, I feel I that's very nice, and I have to, bounce the compliments back to Christine. I mean, she had the vision, to approach, documentary filmmaking as a way to sort of help the county and help future generations. And I'm just like, feel very lucky that she came to me, to help kind of put this all together. And I'm from here in Monmouth County, as I mentioned, so I'm just really proud, and I see these films as sort of my legacy into the future. And I'm proud that they copies of these films are in the county archives, and I always imagine the day dozens or hundreds of years from now, people digging through those archives, pulling out those films, and maybe there will be a reissue, a remaster, another film festival long after we're all gone. And so those are the kind of things that just kind of
Right,
get me kind of psyched.
right. One last question. I'm sticking to the schedule. One last question. What would you want viewers, not readers, viewers to take away from this when they watch it? What's the takeaway?
Adam, you
um,
want to go first with that one?
Sure. I mean, just that Monmouth County, the legacy here is exciting. It's a story that deserves to be told. If people are talking about Boston, they're talking about Philadelphia, they're talking about the 250th anniversary, then Monmouth County, stands on its own among those heavy hitters of the Revolutionary War time. And, we should also mention the Monmouth NJ 250th Committee, who is organizing so many cool events, related to the 250th anniversary this year. This film is just one part of that. So there's a lot of ways to sort of celebrate the 250th anniversary. Our other producer on the film, Ted Maturo, the executive director of the Monmouth NJ 250, was instrumental in getting this film made and helping with the logistics and the interview. So we have to give a shout out to him. And Christine?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of those sentiments. And I think coming away recognizing that our history is so important to know and understand and continue the legacy going forward. We need to preserve our historic sites. We need to preserve our open spaces that have historical relevance. We need to keep our county beautiful.
Correct.
And we want everyone to be proud of Monmouth County and get involved in the celebration. MonmouthNJ250.org.
Perfect. Perfect. This was great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just going to stop recording. This was wonderful. You know what I learned, and I don't know if you saw me, I was writing some stuff down because I still take notes. I can't get it out of my system.
Me too.
Thank you so much, and only good things come from this. Thank you. I'm going to stop
Thank you.
recording.
Thank you.